Hello fellow Tyrians, a little housekeeping before we get on to the guide itself. This build was created as a submission to the Hardstuck and Accessibility Wars build challenge. The goal was to make something that operates in PvE environments at under 20 APM, and the result was this, which is just slightly a meme build. Okay, it's a meme, but it's worked well enough for me, and I wanted to share it with the community. I just know there's going to be questions and comments about choices I've made, but I'm trying to keep things short-ish here, so this video is going to be a rundown of the build mixed in with a little primer of Revenant and Vindicator mechanics for folks who are completely uninitiated to the profession. So, to address a probably non-zero amount of these remarks, I'm going to be uploading a sort of addenda where I discuss my decisions and some of the things I found along the way during testing when I have time to record it. Once it's available, you'll find a card that'll be appearing on screen now or in the description. If you just want the build, you'll also find a gw2skills.net link down there, and the video is chaptered so you can skip to the exact part you want to go to. And with all that out of the way, let's get on to the rest of the video. The Vindicator skill, Urn of St. Victor, is one of the strangest skills in the entire game. It has solid base healing and healing power scalings compared to most AoE heals, but isn't locked behind a transformation or hidden away in a kit. In fact, it hardly has a cooldown at all. The Urn puts out its healing in a pulse every second, but that comes at a cost of dealing percentage max health damage to you for every single pulse of healing. It also nullifies all healing that is done to you and makes it so you have 0 energy regeneration per second. You're making a hefty sacrifice for that amount of healing, and theoretically, you'll only be able to maintain it for as long as your HP holds out. So what's the point? Sure, it does a lot of healing, but the thing can easily knock you onto your backside. If you could find a way to get rid of that limitation, I guess you could just get massive amounts of healing for very little in the way of resources and player inputs. That sounds like one solid option for an accessible healing build if it were possible. Fortunately, it is. And thanks to some traits that can be picked up along the way, you can also pull 5-figure DPS in benchmark conditions, which is pretty darn good for a healer, and you'll get all that for less than 20 APM. I think the best place to start with this build is the consumables and gear, since that part is pretty straightforward. For food, you want fruit salad with mint garnish if you've got an ascended chef around, and delicious rice balls as an exotic alternative. For your utility, you want furious sharpening stones. As far as gear is concerned, everything is Zealot stats. Weapons, armor, trinkets, all of it. Slot in Runes of the Monk in your armor, or Runes of Water if you're not sitting on a medium pile of Ascalonian tears. Your weapons are Greatsword and Staff, both slotted with Sigils of Transference and Sigils of Force. The build functions with exotics, but your damage will be substantially diminished and your heals will be weaker. Also, crafted Zealot's gear is expensive. The short version of why the build runs Zealots is because you aren't turning out that many boons, and your healing output isn't all that reliant on boons, so you don't need concentration. You also don't want toughness because you're not a tank, condition damage because you don't apply that many conditions, and vitality for reasons we'll get into later. All that combined makes Zealot's gear really the only viable option for this build. Because you're a Revenant, your utility skills are determined by the legends that you equip. For this build, we're using Victor and Archimorius, which is the legendary Alliance stance, and Ventari, which is the legendary Centaur stance. As far as traits are concerned, we're running Devastation, Salvation, and of course, Vindicator. For Devastation, we'll be taking Unsuspecting Strikes, Assassin's Presence, and Swift Termination. For Salvation, we'll be taking Tranquil Balance, Resilient Spirit, and Selfless Amplification. And finally, for Vindicator, we'll be taking Amnesty of Xingzhe, Song of Arboreum, and finally, Saint of Zuhelzer. The reason this build can effectively hold up the Urn of St. Victor forever is because of the trait Resilient Spirit. Per the skill fact, it grants you a barrier every 3 seconds per boon on you to a cap of 5 boons. The amount of damage the Urn does to you effectively scales with your vitality. Even though it will always be a flat percentage of your max HP per pulse, more vitality means the actual numerical value of the damage it does will be higher. By keeping your vitality low, the amount of damage dealt by the Urn per pulse can be offset by the amount of barrier generated from Resilient Spirit. The breakpoint for where this happens, with no vitality from gear or traits, is 4 boons. If you're in any sort of organized content with boon-generating supports, 4 boons is nothing. It doesn't even matter what boons they are either, you just need 4. At its most basic, the build has you activating the Urn of St. Victor and auto-attacking with either your Staff or Greatsword. Staff provides a small amount of extra healing output, and Greatsword offers more damage. When you feel like your squad doesn't need the healing, or you've taken damage and want to top yourself off, drop the Urn, heal yourself up if you need it, and keep auto-attacking until your squad mates need healing again, at which point, pick the urn back up, and continue attacking like normal. If your subgroup is in need of some burst healing, either use your dodge or Selfless Spirit, which is Victor's heal skill. I say your dodge because one of the core mechanics of Vindicator is that your standard dodges are replaced with a single ability that uses your endurance as a resource to cast it. The skill can be altered with your Grandmaster trait to adapt to your playstyle. In the case of this build, your dodge becomes a skill known as Saint's Shield, which is a hardy AoE heal that applies barrier and amplifies your outgoing healing by 20% for 6 seconds. If there's an incoming attack that you just can't afford to get hit by, but you also can't avoid for some reason or another, you can use Greatsword 4 or Staff 3 to block the damage. Greatsword 4 actually flips over to a skill that does an increased amount of damage for the number of attacks that you've blocked, but it doesn't really become worth using until you've blocked about 3 or more hits with it. Anyways, repeat the playstyle I've just discussed until either your squad or the bad guy is dead. Given all the variables from encounter to encounter and squad to squad, the APM required to play this build is a little difficult to estimate. That being said, I've yet to break 20 APM when healing, and that's when I was doing the quote-unquote rotation on top of the playstyle I just described. That quote-unquote rotation is something we'll be discussing shortly. Also, do be careful when dropping the urn. Not because it's fragile or anything, in fact, your character's animated to spike the thing into the ground like they're stopping someone in PvP. It's because the skill to drop the urn has a small cast timer. If you interrupt that cast with another skill, you won't actually drop the urn, and all of its effects will stay active. That means that if you're trying to patch yourself up in a hurry, you may end up not even healing yourself at all. You'll know when it's safe to use your healing skills on yourself if the icon for the Urn of St. Victor looks like this. Before going any further, I feel like I should also address the fact that we have an entire other bar of utility skills to work with. By pressing F1 with your default keybinds, you enter the legendary Centaur stance. Switching into this stance will instantly get rid of the urn if you have it up, reset you to 50 energy, and spawns a tablet that you can move around independently from yourself. All your utility skills in this stance will happen where your tablet is positioned, and what is usually your heal skill is what allows you to move it. This all sounds a little tricky to manage, but all of the stance's utility skills don't interrupt what your actual character is doing. If you know where you're standing is safe, you can just keep swinging away with your weapon and take time to focus on doing things with the tablet. Generally speaking though, you're going to want to keep it either near you or near your squadmates. Once you feel like you've gotten a hang of the build and how to play, you can start adding on additional weapon skills beyond just your blocks in order to increase your performance. Greatsword can add skill 5 for an additional 4.4 APM and a 17% increase in DPS if used off cooldown. You can also add Greatsword 3 on top of that for a total of 12.6 APM and a total of 20% increased DPS. Bear in mind though that if you're holding up the urn, you aren't regenerating energy. That's not a big deal if you're just using Greatsword 5, but using Greatsword 3 alongside of it can chew through your energy pretty quick. Those who favor Staff can start using Staff 2 for an additional boost of healing and a slight damage bump. It's really so marginal though that you should probably just save it for when you need the healing. Also, Staff 5 does an incredible amount of CC. Use it on break bars when your team needs it. Even if you're using Greatsword, you should be swapping weapons to use this skill. It's just that good. Finally, if you've become familiar enough with an encounter to know that there isn't a lot of mandatory damage incoming, you can sometimes get away with switching to Archimorius by pressing F3 per default keybinds when in the Alliance stance. Throwing down some Spears of Archimorius on cooldown adds about 4.6 APM. The average Greatsword user gets an additional 6% damage, while Staff enjoyers can see a healthy 15% damage boost. Just be mindful that if you're holding the urn when you flip over to Archimorius, you'll continue holding it and won't get access to spears until you drop it. For the last bit of this video, I want to go over some minor details that I feel shouldn't be left unsaid. You've probably noticed that I haven't been talking much about healing output. That's because, given the passive nature of the healing from the urn, I didn't think it was all that necessary. For the record though, it appears to be over 1700 healing per second per player, with a little variance because of trait and rune interactions. Between the heal over time effect and some well-timed usage of your dodge and your other healing skills, you'll be able to keep everyone on their feet in almost every encounter. My final point is that this build is not really a conventional healer by Guild Wars 2 standards. Most healers are boon supports as well as healers. What it brings to the table instead is damage output when compared to other healers, and especially when taking the APM required to play this build effectively into account. Thankfully, there's a good number of viable boon-generating DPS builds right now, and recent comments from ArenaNet indicate that there may only be more on the way. It can already fit into a subgroup filled with perfectly normal roles, and after a little bit of a learning curve, can clear a lot of content. As with many things in this game, if you can find yourself a group of folks who have the same taste for awful ideas as you do, you'll have an excellent time.
Nice. Woo!
And that's it. If you're still watching, thank you all so much for watching. The addenda is coming soon, and I may have some more build videos in mind. Hopefully the next one will be a bit more practical than this one. I don't think there's anything else to add at this point, so cliche outro remark goes here. See ya!